She laughed when I stood up alone in the courtroom. No lawyer beside me. No folders carried by assistants. Just my chair sliding back and a single file in my hand. Her laugh was not nervous. It was relaxed. Confident. The kind of laugh that assumes the ending is already written. Her lawyer smiled as well, slow and practiced. The judge lifted his eyes briefly, surprised, then waited. Behind us, quiet murmurs traveled across the room. Everyone assumed the same thing. A man standing alone must be unprepared. She believed that moment confirmed every story she had told herself. That I had run out of money. That I was cornered. That I was trying to look brave while falling apart. She leaned back in her chair, satisfied, already imagining how this would be explained later over dinner. What she could not see was the months behind that silence. Late nights reading documents. Learning structures. Understanding what signatures truly mean when time exposes them. When the judge asked if I wished to proceed without counsel, my answer was steady. Yes. Nothing more. I did not explain myself. I did not justify the choice. Confidence at this stage does not need decoration. The courtroom settled into a different rhythm. Pens stopped moving. Her lawyer stopped smiling. The judge nodded once, signaling that the responsibility was now fully mine. I opened the file slowly, not for drama, but because there was no rush anymore. The first document was ordinary at first glance. Dates. Numbers. Familiar names. She watched calmly, still certain I was about to embarrass myself. Then I began to speak, not defensively, not emotionally, but clearly. Each sentence connected to the next. Not accusations, just facts placed in order. Her expression changed in stages. Curiosity replaced amusement. Confusion followed confidence. The room shifted with her. The judge leaned forward. Her lawyer straightened his posture. The laughter that had filled the room minutes earlier felt distant now, almost inappropriate. She was still smiling when I began. She stopped when she realized I was not explaining myself. I was revealing the framework she had been standing on without understanding it. This was no longer a performance. It was an unveiling. That was the instant I understood the balance had shifted permanently, not because I raised my voice, but because preparation had quietly replaced assumption, and truth had finally entered the room that day. This was never about pride or theatrics. Walking in alone was a decision shaped long before the hearing date appeared on paper. While she assumed time would blur details and fatigue would soften memory, I was doing the opposite. Every evening became a review. Every document became familiar. Dates stopped being numbers and turned into patterns. What looked like routine filings slowly revealed intent, timing, and dependence she never noticed. I studied everything she believed was safely buried. Bank movements, property clauses, amendments signed without thought. I followed the sequence rather than the emotion. The story was not hidden, it was simply scattered. Piece by piece, I rebuilt it in order, understanding where leverage truly lived. She prepared for noise. I prepared for alignment. Where she expected confusion, I built clarity. Where she planned delay, I mapped consequence. Her strategy was predictable to anyone who has lived long enough to recognize repetition. Overwhelm first, then intimidation, then exhaustion. Let the system grind until surrender feels reasonable. She trusted her lawyer to stretch language and blur responsibility. I trusted structure. Lawyers often argue around facts. Owners step directly through them, because ownership demands comprehension, not interpretation. She arrived with confidence fueled by representation. I arrived with restraint fueled by certainty. Every page I carried had already been tested against her claims. I did not need someone to translate what I had personally verified. This was not arrogance. It was familiarity. I knew which questions mattered and which ones were designed to distract. The courtroom felt different once I began to explain my choice. I did not attack. I did not justify. I simply outlined how preparation had replaced dependence. The judge listened without interruption. The rhythm of the room slowed. Pens that had moved automatically paused. Her lawyer shifted from performance to calculation. Something unspoken became clear to everyone present. This space was never meant for spectacle. It was built for evaluation. Contracts, ownership, obligation. Not volume. Not posture. I had not come to fight. I had come to account for what existed versus what was claimed. The moment I finished speaking, the judge leaned forward, eyes fixed on the documents, and stopped taking notes entirely. That silence mattered more than any argument. It signaled control, patience, and readiness. For the first time, I saw her doubt replace certainty, and I knew preparation had already done its work that day there. She built her confidence on the belief that I trusted blindly. Years of shared routines had trained her to assume I skimmed, signed, and forgot. That assumption became her armor. While she focused on appearances and control, I quietly changed habits. I reread old agreements, not emotionally, but methodically. Familiar pages began revealing unfamiliar weight. What once felt harmless now carried intention, and I realized trust had been the most expensive mistake I could correct. The clause appeared ordinary, folded inside routine paperwork no one ever rereads. It mentioned maintenance, continuity, and consent, words designed to look harmless. She believed it favored her freedom. In reality, it anchored her lifestyle to my authorization. Without my signature, the structure supporting her expenses weakened. It was not hidden. It was simply ignored, relying on my silence to remain powerful. Time had turned neglect into leverage I could finally activate without warning or apology from anyone involved there. When I began reading it aloud, her lawyer reacted instantly. He stood, interrupted, and objected, hoping momentum would break. The judge did not look at him. He raised one hand and asked him to sit. That moment shifted authority. The room understood something had surfaced that procedure could not bury, and control quietly moved away from representation. No voices rose. Yet tension tightened across every row of seats present as certainty drained from her posture without a single word spoken. Her confidence did not collapse immediately. It fractured slowly, visible only to those paying attention. She shifted in her chair, crossed her arms, uncrossed them again. The certainty she arrived with began dissolving into calculation. She was no longer watching me perform. She was measuring risk, searching for reassurance that never arrived. Every second stretched, and the silence grew heavier than any argument she expected. Eyes shifted between us, sensing imbalance forming long before judgment was spoken that morning alone. The smallest movement revealed the truth she could no longer hide. She reached for her water glass, intending calm. Her fingers missed the base, then corrected. The glass rattled softly against the table. No one laughed. No one spoke. In that fragile sound lived the first undeniable signal that her certainty had cracked, and preparation had quietly taken its place. It was not defeat, but recognition arriving sooner than she planned, and the room felt it immediately before anyone acknowledged the shift out loud then. The change did not arrive loudly. It slipped in unnoticed, carried by pauses between breaths and the absence of interruption. Chairs stopped shifting. Papers stopped rustling. The room adjusted itself without instruction. What had felt theatrical minutes earlier now felt procedural. Attention drifted away from me, not out of boredom, but because nothing about my presence required effort anymore. I stood still, while something unseen began pressing gently against her certainty, and the audience sensed balance quietly shifting there today. Spectators who arrived expecting confrontation leaned forward instead, studying her reactions rather than my posture. Faces that once searched for weakness now searched for comprehension. Her confidence did not vanish instantly. It thinned. Shoulders lowered slightly. A practiced smile stalled midway and never returned. She adjusted her seat as if comfort could restore authority. It could not. The framework supporting her expectations was being dismantled in plain sight. No voices rose, yet certainty continued leaking from the room, slowly everywhere. This was not revenge dressed as patience. It was consequence unfolding at its natural pace. Nothing was forced. Nothing exaggerated. Each document settled where it belonged, creating weight without noise. Her earlier assurance relied on assumptions remaining untouched. Once examined, those assumptions collapsed quietly. The absence of argument made it heavier. When no one rushes to defend, truth occupies more space than anger ever could. Age teaches restraint, and restraint was finally controlling the tempo here for everyone present inside. The judge observed without expression, allowing the moment to mature. He did not interrupt the silence because it was doing necessary work. Her lawyer remained seated, alert but limited, aware that momentum had changed owners. She glanced toward him seeking reassurance, then looked away. Realization arrived in fragments. This was no longer about persuasion. It was about accountability, and accountability rarely announces itself loudly. For experienced eyes, the shift was unmistakable and irreversible now within this quiet courtroom today alone. Then came the question, simple and direct, stripped of ceremony. It landed heavier than any accusation. She hesitated, buying seconds that offered no shelter. Her answer never formed. Control slipped from her hands entirely. She asked for a break, voice measured but unsteady. The room remained silent, understanding what that request truly meant. Preparation had finished its work, and consequence had officially begun. Nothing needed celebration, because maturity recognizes endings without applause and experience respects silence at moments like this. Mature people notice shifts before words explain them. It begins in posture and timing. Her lawyer changed first. His tone softened, questions shortened, movement slowed. The sharp edge he arrived with disappeared. He stopped addressing me directly and redirected his attention upward. Not arguments anymore, but clarifications. Not pressure, but positioning. Years of courtrooms teach when offense no longer serves purpose. This was that moment. He understood the structure had already spoken. Attacking me would only amplify it. Protecting her now required containment, not confrontation, and the room sensed that transition. No one required explanation to feel the momentum turn. She noticed it seconds later. Her lawyer leaned toward the bench, voice low, measured, cooperative. He was no longer defending character or intent. He was discussing scope and impact, reducing exposure, controlling outcomes. The shift was subtle but devastating. Winning had left the room without announcement. Damage control had entered quietly. Her expression tightened as understanding settled. This was no longer a contest she could dominate with confidence. The battlefield she imagined had become an assessment table, and assessments rarely favor those unprepared. Age teaches that control disappears when reality replaces performance entirely. That lesson arrived quickly for her there. She sat straighter, then slouched slightly, unsure which posture projected strength. Her hands folded, unfolded, then rested still. The confidence she rehearsed had nowhere to land. The lawyer she trusted was no longer shielding her. He was calculating survival. That realization cuts deeper with age, because experience teaches what it means when professionals retreat. It means risk has surpassed ego. She glanced toward me instinctively, searching for reaction, perhaps reassurance, perhaps resistance. I remained facing forward, allowing consequence to complete its work uninterrupted. Silence stretched between us, louder than any argument she expected from the beginning of that hearing day. Her eyes lingered on me longer than necessary. That look carried request without words. Help. Intervention. A pause and momentum. But this was no longer personal. The process had taken control. I understood then what maturity truly grants. The ability to step aside and let systems finish what truth initiates. I did not turn. I did not nod. I did not soften. When she finally looked away, the room exhaled. The outcome was no longer uncertain. It was simply waiting for formality to catch up. Some lessons arrive late, but leave permanent marks for those forced to learn publicly then. The ruling arrived without ceremony, carried in a tone that left no room for interpretation. No raised voice, no dramatic pause. Just clarity. The judge spoke evenly, outlining conclusions that had already formed long before the final sentence. There was no attempt to shame her or paint me as victorious. This was not theater. It was resolution delivered with restraint, the kind that mature people recognize as final. Her expectations had been built on spectacle. She prepared for confrontation, for a scene she could later rewrite. Instead, the decision dismantled leverage quietly. Financial access was suspended. Claims she relied on were rejected. Authority shifted without announcement. The narrative she rehearsed for months dissolved in seconds, replaced by documentation that could not be argued away. Nothing about it felt aggressive, which made it heavier. I did not feel the urge to react. There was no rush of triumph. No need to search the room for validation. Silence settled naturally, filling the space where arguments once lived. Her lawyer gathered papers slowly, already aware that nothing further could be adjusted. The spectators remained seated, absorbing the weight of consequence unfolding without drama. This was not a win to celebrate. It was an ending to accept. She sat motionless as the implications arrived one by one. Frozen assets meant stalled plans. Denied claims meant revised futures. Control had shifted completely, not through humiliation, but through removal. That distinction matters with age. Public embarrassment fades. Loss of leverage endures. She understood that difference as she stared ahead, expression empty, processing permanence rather than shock. When the session closed, there was no lingering conversation. No final glance exchanged. People stood quietly, chairs moving carefully, as if sound itself felt inappropriate. I gathered my file and waited for the room to clear, not out of courtesy, but because nothing required haste anymore. Patience had replaced urgency. She laughed when I arrived alone, certain the absence of representation meant vulnerability. That belief carried her through the morning until reality corrected it. When she finally stood to leave, she did so without support, without guidance, without audience. She exited through the same door she entered, but not with the same certainty. She left the room alone, carrying silence where confidence once lived. For those watching closely, the lesson was unmistakable, because preparation outlasts noise, and consequence always arrives quieter than applause in rooms where experience values silence most. After the hearing, people approached me quietly. Some congratulated me. Others looked confused. A few asked directly why I showed no emotion, why my face stayed calm. They expected relief to look like celebration, victory to look like satisfaction. I understood the question, but I also knew the answer would not make sense to those still measuring power by volume. What happened in that courtroom was not a win in the traditional sense. Nothing was taken by force. Nothing was shouted into submission. What I felt instead was release. A pressure I had carried for years dissolved without noise. Power, I learned, is not about being seen. It is about no longer needing to explain yourself to anyone who benefits from misunderstanding you. I did not defeat her. I exited a role I had been assigned without consent. The role of the man who compensates, apologizes, adjusts, and absorbs. Court simply formalized what I had already decided internally. I was done negotiating my worth. That shift matters more with age, because time teaches how expensive emotional debt becomes when left unpaid. Walking out of the building, I noticed details I had ignored before. The weight of the door, the sound of my steps, the absence of urgency. Nothing chased me. Nothing demanded response. That quiet was unfamiliar, yet grounding. It confirmed something important had ended without needing replacement. Closure does not announce itself loudly. It settles in when resistance disappears. People often confuse restraint for weakness. Experience teaches otherwise. Restraint is clarity, choosing not to perform. Revenge seeks witnesses. Finality seeks peace. I had no desire to watch her react or struggle. Her consequences were no longer my responsibility. The system had taken over, and I was free to step aside. Later that day, as messages arrived and questions followed, I answered none of them. I did not owe a narrative. The outcome spoke clearly enough. She lost more than money in that room. She lost access to my attention, my reaction, my availability. That loss cannot be appealed. When access ends, power finally reveals its true shape, and it is quiet, contained, and permanent. That evening, I slept without replaying conversations or planning defenses. No strategies. No justifications. Just rest. For the first time in years, tomorrow felt neutral, not threatening. That neutrality was the reward. It confirmed that freedom begins when nothing remains to be proven to anyone. I learned something permanent the day the room emptied. Representation has its place, especially when chaos rules. But ownership changes everything. When you understand what you hold, you no longer need someone to translate your position. You speak with alignment because the facts already belong to you. That realization did not come from ego, but from experience shaped by time, mistakes, and observation. She believed confidence was built through intimidation and volume. She trusted sharp words and aggressive posture. I learned something quieter. Preparation removes fear before it appears. Knowing the ending changes how you stand, how you breathe, how you wait. The loudest voice often hides uncertainty, while certainty rarely needs reinforcement. Throughout the process, I watch professionals perform their roles. Lawyers interpret, negotiate, and protect. Owners verify, trace, and decide. Both are valuable, but they operate on different planes. One manages conflict. The other defines reality. Once I understood that distinction, my dependence dissolved permanently. This was not a rejection of expertise. It was a recalibration of responsibility. I will still seek counsel when needed, but I will never surrender comprehension. Age teaches that ignorance is expensive and clarity compounds. When you know what you own, you cannot be cornered by noise or performance. The most dangerous presence in any courtroom is calm awareness. Not volume, not threat. Simply someone who has already walked the path mentally and accepted the outcome. That person does not improvise. He confirms. He does not chase reactions. He allows process to conclude. I left that experience with a principle I will never abandon. Respect does not come from demands or speeches. It comes from records, preparation, and proof. When documentation speaks clearly, voices become unnecessary. That lesson stays with you longer than any ruling. I will never hire someone to speak for me when the truth is already organized in my hands. The older you get, the clearer this becomes. Authority is not borrowed, it is built. Once built, it stands quietly. Respect follows structure, not emotion. That day taught me to document my worth, protect my knowledge, and move forward without explanation. The ending was never uncertain. It was simply waiting for the moment when preparation met opportunity, and silence was enough. This understanding now guides every decision I make, reminding me that maturity favors clarity, patience, and records over impulse, reaction, and the temporary comfort of applause in public moments.